Shohei Ohtani's dad never once told him to practice harder. I know. That sounds wrong. You've seen what this man can do. You've watched him throw 102 miles per hour and then step into the batter's box like it's the most natural thing in the world. You watched the World Baseball Classic and felt something you didn't quite have words for, and your brain went straight there. What did his parents do? What was the system? How early did they start? Because if there's a blueprint, you want it. Here's the thing. There is a blueprint, but it's probably the opposite of what you're expecting. And today, I'm going to walk you through exactly what that looks like and why developmental science says it works. Not just for once-in-a-generation athletes, but for the kid who is currently using your couch as a trampoline. When you were watching Ohtani at the WBC, when he walked up to the plate in that final inning, and the whole stadium went absolutely silent, did you feel it? Not just the excitement of the game, that other thing, that quiet little voice somewhere in the back of your chest that said, am I doing enough for my kid? Because if Ohtani's parents figured something out, and I'm not figuring it out, am I already behind? You are not alone in this. Not even close. I hear from parents every single week who send me some version of the same message. I see what other kids are doing and I feel like we're falling behind. I just want to give my child every possible advantage. And I want you to hear this right now, before we go 1 second further. That feeling, that anxiety, it doesn't make you a bad parent. It makes you a parent. Full stop. The love underneath that worry is completely real. You deserve to understand what's actually happening, not just be told to calm down. So let's talk about where that pressure is actually coming from, because I promise you, it did not start with you. Here's something nobody says out loud in the parenting conversation. The anxiety you feel about your child's future has been carefully, culturally, systematically built over decades by a world that profits from your insecurity. We live in an era that sends every parent the same message over and over in 100 different forms. Earlier is better, more is better. And if you're not doing both, your child is already behind. Julie Lithcott-Hames spent years as dean of freshmen at Stanford. She watched thousands of kids arrive, exhausted, brittle, having crossed every finish line their parents set up for them, and having no idea what they actually wanted. She called it the checklisted childhood, quietly doing harm at both ends of the spectrum to the kids who couldn't keep up, and to the kids who could. Japan, the country that produced Shohei Ohtani, has its own version of this exact pressure. It's called Kyoiku Mama, literally education mother. A parent so intensely focused on a child's achievements that the child's entire childhood becomes a performance for some imagined future. 2 countries, 2 cultures, thousands of miles apart. One identical anxiety. Earlier is better. More is better. The clock is always running. So when that voice shows up in your chest during a baseball highlight reel, I need you to know something. That voice didn't come from inside you. It was handed to you by a culture that needs you to feel like you're never quite enough. That matters because it means you are allowed to put it down. Okay, now here's where the story gets genuinely surprising. Shohei Ohtani's father, Toru Ohtani, played semi-professional baseball in Japan, good enough to understand exactly what elite performance looked like and exactly what it cost. And when his young son showed an interest in the game, here's what Toru did. He played catch with him. That's it. He played catch in the backyard because his kid wanted to play catch. Not a structured training program, not an optimized schedule, not a vision board for Shohei's future career. Toru Ohtani's philosophy comes down to something almost startlingly simple. If Shohei loves it, he will pursue it. The parent's job is not to push. The parent's job is to be present. Now, why does that actually work? Developmental science has a very specific answer, and it starts with a concept called self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is not self-esteem. Self-esteem is, I feel good about myself. Self-efficacy is something deeper, the belief that my own actions produce outcomes. That's what I do actually matters, that I have real agency over my own life. Albert Bandura at Stanford spent decades studying this. His research consistently pointed to self-efficacy as one of the strongest predictors of long-term achievement and resilience we have identified, not early test scores, not how many activities a child was enrolled in. The internal belief, I can do things, and doing them is worth the effort. So where does self-efficacy come from? It doesn't come from being told you're great. It doesn't come from trophies or gold stars or a parent who solves every problem before the child has to feel it. It comes from trying something, struggling with it, and discovering through your own effort that the struggle produces results. It comes from a parent who steps back, just enough to let the child experience that discovery for themselves. Shohei Ohtani stepped back, and the world has been watching the result ever since. Let me take you inside the brain for just a minute, because this is the part that changed how I think about parenting completely. When a child does something because they genuinely want to, because they're curious, because it's fun, because it feels like theirs, a very specific pathway activates. The dopamine system. Here's the thing about dopamine that most people have backwards. We think of it as the reward chemical, but researchers like Dr. Kent Berridge at the University of Michigan have shown that dopamine is actually more about wanting than having. It's the motivation signal, the pull towards something. When a child chooses an activity when it's self-directed, the dopamine system associates that activity with drive from the inside. The interest itself becomes the fuel. But when a child is pushed, scheduled, evaluated, and reminded constantly that their performance reflects on the family, something different begins to happen. The external reward starts to replace the internal one. Developmental psychologists call this the over-justification effect. You take an activity a child naturally enjoys, attach grades or parental expectations to it, and something quietly shifts. The child is no longer doing it because they love it. Research exploring this pattern suggests that when children perceive they're acting to satisfy someone else's expectations, their intrinsic motivation, particularly their willingness to persist when things get hard, tends to erode over time. What makes Shohei Ohtani extraordinary isn't the talent. Talent is common. What's extraordinary is that he kept going through injuries, through being told a pitcher couldn't also be a full-time hitter, through moving to a country where he didn't speak the language. He kept going because the drive was his. It came from inside. And that kind of drive cannot be scheduled into a child's Tuesday afternoon. But there are very specific things a parent can do to protect it, and very specific things a parent can do with completely loving intentions that quietly erode it. All right, let me show you what this looks like in a real living room. On a regular Tuesday, your kid comes home from school, drops their backpack exactly 2 feet from the hook it belongs on, which is genuinely a mystery I will never solve. And before they've taken a breath, you ask, how did the test go? Did you get your math quiz back? And maybe the answer is fine, but maybe it isn't. And you feel that clench, and something crosses your face, and your kid sees it. And without a single word about values or expectations, your child has just received a message. My worth in this house is connected to my performance. Now, here's the other version of that same afternoon. Same dropped backpack, same 2 feet from the hook. Hey, I missed you today. What was the best part? That's it. That's the whole shift. Because in that moment, before anything about grades or homework, your child gets a completely different message. I am interested in you, not your output, you. Attachment research, building on the work of Mary Ainsworth and John Bowlby, consistently points to this when a child has reliable access to a caregiver who responds to their emotional reality. Something happens in how that child moves through the world. They feel safe enough to take risks, to try things they might fail at, to push through difficulty without catastrophizing, because the cost of failure isn't love. The floor holds. That is what Toru Ohtani gave his son, not a training philosophy, not an optimized development model, a floor. Okay, I promised you practical. So let's get into it. These are not magic fixes. What these are is a set of approaches that work with how your child's brain is actually built, not against it. And you do not have to be perfect at this. The first one I call follow the spark. When your child shows genuine, unprompted interest in something, anything, your job is to get curious before you get strategic. Your kid is obsessed with dinosaurs? Don't immediately research whether paleontology is a viable career path. First, just get interested with them. Ask questions. Get on the floor. Let them teach you something. What you're doing in that moment is feeding the intrinsic motivation, letting the dopamine system associate this interest with connection, with being seen, with joy. The strategy, if there's ever a place for strategy, comes much later. First comes the spark. The second one I call the struggle window. When your child is stuck on a puzzle, a homework problem, a social conflict, the instinct is to jump in, to fix it. And I understand that instinct completely. But research on executive function development consistently points toward this. That zone of productive frustration, the moment just before a child figures something out, appears to be one of the most neurologically valuable experiences in childhood. So instead of solving it, try this one sentence. That looks really tricky. What have you tried so far? Because embedded in that question is something your child needs to hear. I believe you have the capacity to work through this. I'm here, but you're the one doing it. The third approach comes from Julie Lythcott-Haim's work, and it is the one that sounds the most mundane and is possibly the most powerful. Chores. The Harvard Grant Study, one of the longest longitudinal studies of human development ever conducted, found that doing household chores in childhood showed up as meaningfully linked to professional success in adulthood, particularly when children started young. Not because sweeping a floor builds character in some abstract sense, but because chores teach a child something no enrichment program can replicate. My contribution matters to the people around me. My actions change real outcomes in the real world. The dishes, the laundry, walking the dog, something that actually falls apart if they don't do it. Something with real stakes. The fourth one I call the one-question conversation. When Ohtani was in high school, he used a mandala chart, writing his central goal and mapping everything he believed connected to it. The chart he completed as a high schooler is an extraordinary document. I am absolutely not suggesting you sit your 6-year-old down for a formal goal mapping session, but once a month, or even just a few times a year, try this one question. If you could be really, really good at something, anything in the whole world, what would you want it to be? And then you do the hardest thing. You just listen. You don't evaluate. You don't redirect. You don't problem solve. You listen. And you let your child see that you took the answer seriously. Because what you're actually practicing isn't goal setting. You're practicing the belief that their inner life is worth paying attention to. You're teaching them to listen to themselves. And that internal voice, the one that told a teenager in Iwate Prefecture, Japan, that he could both pitch and hit at the highest level against every piece of conventional wisdom in the sport. That voice gets stronger every single time someone takes it seriously. All right, let's bring this home. The World Baseball Classic is one of the most extraordinary things in sports. And watching Ohtani, it's almost impossible not to want something like that for your own child. Not necessarily baseball, not necessarily sports, just that person who is completely, genuinely, sustainably themselves, doing something they love with everything they have. His parents did not set out to raise the greatest baseball player in a generation. They set out to raise a person who knew what he loved and believed he was capable of pursuing it. The greatness was always his. Their job was not to manufacture it. Their job was to protect the conditions that let it grow. Harvard University's Center on the Developing Child has studied resilience and capability in children for decades. And what their research points to consistently is not early acceleration or packed schedules or academic pressure. It is connection, responsive presence. A child who has the experience repeated enough to become a belief that the adults in their life see them as a person, not a project. So here's what I want you to do this week. Put one of these into practice. Just one. Maybe it's the question you ask when your kid gets home. Maybe it's stepping back for 60 more seconds before you jump in. Maybe it's handing them a real responsibility and actually letting them own it. Because here's the truth about Shohei Ohtani playing catch in that backyard. He wasn't executing a development strategy. He was just there, present, interested, letting his kid lead. And that quiet, unspectacular, completely ordinary act of presence, it built the floor. You are not raising a test score. You are not raising a highlight reel. You are raising a human being who has something in them that the world has never seen before. Your job is to create enough safety, enough space, enough genuine connection that whatever is already in them gets the room it needs to grow. And here's what I know about you. You watched this whole video. You sat with the discomfort of some of these ideas. You're thinking about how to do this better, not because someone is grading you, but because you love your kid that much. That's not a parent who is getting it wrong. That's a parent who is paying attention. And paying attention, that's exactly what this takes. I'll see you in the next one.